Air France Flight 590. On July 25, 2000, Air France Flight 590, a Concorde jet was set to fly from Paris to New York. It was a charter flight carrying 100 passengers, mostly German tourists heading for a cruise, along with 9 crew members. As the Concorde was taking off, it ran over a metal strip that had fallen from the Continental Airlines DC-10 that had departed earlier. This debris caused one of the Concorde tires to burst. The exploding tire sent debris flying, which hit the underside of the left wing and punctured a fuel tank. The leaking fuel caught fire, creating flames under the wing. Even though 2 of its 4 engines lost power, the Concorde was already moving too fast to stop safely, so it had to take off. But with the fire, damaged engines, and landing gear that wouldn't retract, the plane couldn't climb properly. Just 2 minutes after taking off, it crashed into a hotel in Gonesse, France. Tragically, all 109 people on board and 4 people on the ground lost their lives. Investigators found that the crash happened because the metal piece left on the runway punctured the tire. When the tire exploded, pieces of it hit the wing, breaking the fuel tank and causing a fire. The fire led to engine failure, which made it impossible to control the plane. Experts also noted that the Concorde was very heavy at takeoff, which made the situation even worse. American Airlines Flight 587. American Airlines Flight 587 was a regular flight from New York's JFK Airport to Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic on November 12, 2001. Most of the passengers were Dominican Americans traveling back home. The plane, an Airbus A300-600R, had 260 people on board, including 9 crew members. The flight took off shortly after Japan Airlines' Boeing 747. As it climbed, it encountered turbulence from the larger plane. The first officer, who was flying, reacted by moving the rudder, the part of the tail that helps steer, back and forth too aggressively. This put extreme pressure on the plane's vertical stabilizer, causing it to break off. Without the tail, the aircraft became impossible to control. Within seconds, both engines also broke off due to stress, and within minutes, the plane crashed into the Bell Harbor neighborhood in Queens, killing everyone on board and 5 people on the ground. The National Transportation Safety Board investigated and found that the crash was caused by the first officer's excessive rudder movements, which put too much force on the tail. They also discovered that the rudder system on this type of Airbus was very sensitive, making the problem worse. The report pointed out that American Airlines' pilot training may have encouraged overly aggressive responses to turbulence, which contributed to the accident. Alaska Airlines Flight 261. Alaska Airlines Flight 261 was a regular flight from Puerto Vallarta, Mexico to Seattle, Washington, with a stop in San Francisco. On January 31, 2000, the flight was operated by McDonnell Douglas MD-83, carrying 83 passengers and 5 crew members, making a total of 88 people on board. The plane had been flying since 1992 and had logged over 26,000 flight hours. While cruising at 31,000 feet, the pilots began experiencing issues with the horizontal stabilizer, a critical part of the tail that controls the plane's up and down movement. They tried to fix the issue, but the stabilizer got stuck, causing the plane to dive suddenly. The pilots managed to pull it back up, but the problem wasn't solved. A few minutes later, a critical part called the jack screw, which controls the stabilizer, completely failed. With no way to control the plane's pitch, it went into a deep dive and crashed into the Pacific Ocean near Anacapa Island, California. Sadly, all 88 people on board lost their lives. The National Transportation Safety Board investigated the crash and found that the jack screw assembly had worn out because it wasn't properly lubricated. This happened because Alaska Airlines had stretched out its maintenance schedule, and the FAA had approved those longer gaps between inspections. The NTSB concluded that the crash was caused by a loss of pitch control due to this failure. Experts blamed both Alaska Airlines and the FAA for allowing maintenance schedules that put safety at risk. The investigation also revealed that the MD-80 series aircraft didn't have a backup system to prevent such failures. As a result, the NTSB recommended stricter maintenance rules, better oversight, and design improvements to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Singapore Airlines Flight 006. Singapore Airlines Flight 006 was a scheduled flight from Singapore to Los Angeles with a stop in Taipei, Taiwan. On October 31, 2000, the flight was operated by a Boeing 747-412, carrying 159 passengers and 20 crew members, making a total of 179 people on board. The aircraft had been in service since 1997 and featured a special tropical livery to promote the airline's cabin services. During heavy rain and strong winds from the typhoon Zhang, the plane was cleared for takeoff from runway 05L. However, due to poor visibility and possible confusion with taxiway signs, the pilots mistakenly lined up on runway 05R, which was closed for maintenance and had construction equipment on it. Without realizing their mistake, They began their takeoff. A few seconds later, the plane crashed into construction vehicles like excavators and bulldozers, breaking apart and catching fire. Tragically, 83 people lost their lives while 96 survived, some with serious injuries. Taiwan's Aviation Safety Council investigated the crash and found several key reasons behind it. The pilots misidentified the runway and didn't double-check their position before takeoff. The typhoon made visibility worse, making it harder to see ground markings. The closed runway didn't have enough lighting and clear signs to show it wasn't in use. Additionally, the airport lacked a ground radar system that could have alerted air traffic controllers to the mistake. Experts concluded that a mix of human error, bad weather, and poor airport infrastructure caused the accident. As a result, safety recommendations were made to improve runway signage, lighting, and radar systems to prevent such tragedies in the future. China Airlines Flight 611. China Airlines Flight 611 was a passenger flight from Taipei, Taiwan to Hong Kong. On May 25, 2002, the flight was operated by a Boeing 747-209B, an aircraft that had been flying since 1979 and had completed around 64,810 flight hours. On board were 206 passengers and 19 crew members, making a total of 225 people. The plane departed from Taipei bound for Hong Kong, with an expected arrival in just over an hour. However, about 20 minutes into the flight, while cruising at 35,000 feet, it suddenly disappeared from radar. Investigators later discovered that the aircraft had broken apart midair and crashed into the Taiwan Strait, about 23 miles northeast of Penghu Islands. Sadly, no one survived. Taiwan's Aviation Safety Council investigated the crash and found that the plane had suffered damage 22 years earlier. Back in 1980, during a landing in Hong Kong, the aircraft's tail had hit the ground, damaging the rear fuselage. Instead of properly replacing the damaged section as Boeing recommended, a quick fix was applied. A doubler plate was placed over the damaged area. Over time, cracks formed in the structure, and on May 25, 2002, those cracks finally gave way, causing the plane to break apart in the air. Experts stressed how important it is to follow proper maintenance and repair guidelines to keep aircraft safe. The investigation report pointed out that the incorrect repair and lack of proper inspections led to the disaster. Helios Airways Flight 522. On August 14, 2005, Helios Airways Flight 522 was flying from Cyprus to Prague with a planned stop in Athens. The Boeing 737 had 121 people on board, including 115 passengers and 6 crew members. The plane took off and began its climb. But something went wrong. The cabin wasn't pressurizing properly because the systems had been accidentally left in manual mode instead of auto. This caused oxygen levels to drop slowly, leading to hypoxia, a condition where people don't get enough oxygen. The pilots thought the warning alarm meant something else and didn't put on their oxygen masks. Eventually, the crew and passengers lost consciousness, and the plane continued flying on autopilot. It circled over Athens for some time until it ran out of fuel, crashing into a hillside near Grammatiko, Greece. Sadly, everyone on board lost their lives. Investigators later found that a ground engineer had left the pressurization system on manual mode during maintenance, and the pilots didn't notice it during their pre-flight checks. Since the plane's warning sounds were similar for different problems, the pilots misunderstood what was happening. Experts stressed the importance of better warning systems, thorough pre-flight checks, and proper maintenance to prevent such tragedies in the future. TAM Airlines Flight 3054. On July 17, 2007, TAM Airlines Flight 3054 was flying from Porto Alegre to Sao Paulo, Brazil. The Airbus A320 had 187 people on board, including 181 passengers and 6 crew members. The plane landed at Congonhas Airport during rainy conditions. But instead of slowing down, it kept moving too fast and veered to the left. It went past the end of the runway, crossed a busy road, and crashed into TAM Express warehouse and a gas station. The crash caused a massive fire, and tragically, all 187 people on the plane and 12 of the ground lost their lives. This became the deadliest plane crash in Brazil's history. Investigators later found that one of the engine controls was left in the wrong position when the plane landed. The right engine stayed in climb mode, which kept pushing the plane forward, while the left engine was set to idle. Because of this, the plane couldn't slow down properly. On top of that, the systems that helped the plane stop after landing didn't activate. The runway also didn't have proper grooves to drain rainwater, making it even harder for the plane to brake. Experts concluded that pilot error and poor runway conditions played a big role in the accident. The tragedy showed the need for better landing procedures, proper aircraft maintenance, and airport improvements to prevent similar disasters in the future. Air France Flight 447. Air France Flight 447 was flying from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil to Paris, France on June 1, 2009. The Airbus A330 had 228 people on board, including 216 passengers and 12 crew members. While flying over the Atlantic Ocean at 35,000 feet, the plane encountered severe weather. Ice crystals blocked the sensors that measured airspeed, causing the autopilot and automatic throttle to turn off. The pilots had to take control manually, but they made incorrect movements that caused the plane to lose lift and go into a stall. Even though the warning systems alerted them multiple times, they didn't realize the plane was stalling and didn't take the right steps to fix it. The aircraft continued to descend until it crashed into the ocean, tragically killing everyone on board. Investigators from France's Aviation Safety Board found several key issues. The block sensors led to wrong airspeed readings, confusing the pilots. Instead of following proper procedures, the pilots made control inputs that made things worse. They also didn't realize that the plane had stalled and didn't take the actions needed to recover. Experts stressed the need for better pilot training, especially in flying manually at high altitudes and dealing with incorrect airspeed readings. The investigation also pointed out the importance of better communication between aircraft makers, airlines, and pilots to make sure training and procedures are as effective as possible. Comair Flight 5191. On August 27, 2006, Comair Flight 5191, flying as Delta Connection, was set to travel from Lexington, Kentucky to Atlanta, Georgia. The plane was a Bombardier CRJ-100ER with 50 people on board, 47 passengers, and 3 crew members. The pilots were cleared to take off from runway 22, which was suitable for commercial flights. However, they accidentally turned on to runway 26, which was much shorter and mainly used for smaller planes. This runway didn't have lights, but the pilots still started their takeoff. The plane didn't have enough room to gain speed needed for liftoff, so it ran off the end of the runway, crashed into a fence and trees, and caught fire. Sadly, 49 people died, and only the first officer, James Polanki, survived with serious injuries. Investigators from the NTSB found that the pilots didn't properly check their location before takeoff. They also got distracted by unrelated conversations while taxiing, which made them lose awareness of where they were. Another issue was that air traffic control didn't have a rule requiring specific clearance for crossing runways, which could have prevented the mistake. Malaysia Airlines Flight 17. On July 17, 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 took off from Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport heading for Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. It was a routine flight, carrying 283 passengers and 15 crew members. Some were on vacation, others were visiting family, and many were just passing through on their way to different parts of Asia. The plane, a Boeing 777-200ER, was in great condition, and the journey was supposed to take about 11.5 hours. At 33,000 feet over eastern Ukraine, MH17 was flying along a common route used by many airlines. But on the ground, a war was raging between Ukrainian forces and pro-Russian separatists. Something went terribly wrong. A massive explosion tore through the cockpit, instantly breaking the front of the plane apart. The sudden decompression knocked out anyone nearby, and within moments, the aircraft started falling apart. Wreckage and bodies fell over a 20-square-mile area near Hrabov, Ukraine. People on the ground saw the horrifying scene, with debris and human remains raining down. Investigators worked fast to find out what happened. Experts confirmed that MH17 was shot down by a Buk missile, which exploded near the cockpit, killing the pilots instantly and tearing the plane apart. The missile launcher was tracked back to Russia's 53rd Anti-Aircraft Missile Brigade and had been secretly moved into Ukraine, where pro-Russian separatists fired it, likely by mistake. After the attack, the launcher was quickly returned to Russia. In 2022, after years of legal proceedings, a Dutch court convicted 3 men, 2 Russian and 1 Ukrainian, of murder and obscenity, sentencing them to life in prison. The Russian government denied involvement, but overwhelming evidence confirmed that the missile system was Russian-supplied and that the separatist fighters were responsible for firing it. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, also known as MH370, was a regular flight from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia to Beijing, China, on March 8, 2014. It took off just after midnight with 239 people on board, 227 passengers, and 12 crew members. The flight was supposed to take about 6 hours, and most of the passengers were Chinese citizens. Everything seemed normal at first, but about 40 minutes after takeoff, something strange happened. But then about a few minutes into the flight, MH370's transponder stopped working, and the plane vanished from air traffic control radar. However, military radar picked it up taking a sharp turn west, flying back over Malaysia and toward the Indian Ocean. Then it disappeared completely. Despite years of searching, the main wreckage has never been found, making this one of the biggest mysteries in aviation history. Some answers did come later. In 2015 and 2016, pieces of the plane washed up on beaches in Africa and islands in the Indian Ocean, suggesting it crashed somewhere in the southern Indian Ocean. A 2018 investigation found that someone likely changed the plane's course on purpose, but it couldn't say who or why. Many theories have emerged: hijacking, pilot involvement, mechanical failure, but there's no solid proof of what really happened. Now, a new search is about to begin. In early 2025, a company called Ocean Infinity will use advanced underwater drones to scan the ocean floor in a 2,200 square mile area. They're operating under the no find, no fee deal, meaning they'll only get paid up to $70 million if they locate the wreckage. After all these years, MH370 remains an unsolved mystery, and families of those on board are still waiting for answers. Germanwings Flight 9525. Germanwings Flight 9525 was a regular flight from Barcelona, Spain to Dusseldorf, Germany on March 24, 2015. It departed with 150 people on board, including 144 passengers and 6 crew members. The journey was expected to take about 90 minutes, but halfway through the climb, something went terribly wrong. As the plane reached 38,000 feet, the captain stepped out of the cockpit, likely for a short break. That's when the co-pilot, Andreas Lupitz, locked the door from the inside and wouldn't let him back in. Air traffic controllers tried to reach the plane, but Lupitz didn't respond. The captain desperately tried to open the door, but the cockpit security rules made it impossible. For the next 10 minutes, the plane kept descending, heading straight for the French Alps. At 10:41 a.m., it crashed near a remote mountain area about 60 miles northwest of Nice, killing everyone on board. Investigators later found that Lubitz had struggled with severe depression and had been ruled unfit to work by his doctor just before the flight, but he never told his airline. The crash was ruled a deliberate act, sparking serious discussions about mental health screenings for pilots and stronger safety measures in cockpits. Metrojet Flight 9268. Metrojet Flight 9268 was a charter flight operated by Metrojet, a Russian airline. On October 31, 2015, it took off from Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt early in the morning, heading to St. Petersburg, Russia. There were 224 people on board, 217 passengers, including 25 children and 7 crew members. Most of the passengers were Russian tourists flying home after their vacations. Just 23 minutes after takeoff, while cruising at 31,000 feet, the plane suddenly disappeared from radar. Flight data showed strange altitude changes before it vanished. Wreckage was later found scattered across a large area in the Sinai Peninsula, showing that the plane had broken apart midair. Sadly, no one survived. Investigators from Russia, Egypt, and Airbus looked into the crash. On November 17, 2015, Russian officials confirmed that a bomb had exploded on board, causing the plane to break apart. They found traces of explosives in the wreckage and determined that the blast was equivalent to 1 kilogram of TNT. A group linked to ISIS later claimed responsibility, saying it was in retaliation for Russian military actions in Syria. In response, Russia announced a $50 million reward for information about the attackers. This tragedy raised serious concerns about airport security, especially in areas where terrorist threats are high. Many countries reviewed and strengthened their security procedures to prevent similar attacks in the future. EgyptAir Flight 804. On May 19, 2016, EgyptAir Flight 804 took off from Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport, heading to Cairo, Egypt. It was a routine overnight flight, carrying 66 people, 56 passengers from different countries including Egypt, France, and Canada, along with 10 crew members. About 2 hours and 40 minutes into the flight, while cruising at 37,000 feet over the Mediterranean Sea, the plane suddenly vanished from radar. There were no distress signals. Greek air traffic controllers later reported that the aircraft made sharp turns, 90 degrees left, then 360 degrees right, before dropping quickly. Soon after, debris and human remains were found in the sea, about 180 miles north of Alexandria, Egypt. Sadly, there were no survivors. The investigation involved experts from Egypt, France, and other international agencies. Early data from the aircraft system showed smoke in the lavatory and avionics bay just before the crash, hinting at a possible in-flight fire. In December 2016, Egyptian officials claimed they found traces of explosives on the victims, suggesting terrorism. However, French investigators disagreed, saying there was no evidence of a bomb. In April 2022, a new report suggested that a cockpit fire may have caused the crash. Investigators believe that a lit cigarette combined with an oxygen leak from a faulty oxygen mask could have sparked the fire. Smoking in the cockpit was reportedly common among Egyptian pilots at the time. Even today, experts still debate if it was really an accident or something more sinister. Asiana Airlines Flight 214. On July 6, 2013, Asiana Airlines Flight 214 took off from Incheon International Airport in South Korea, heading to San Francisco International Airport in the United States. It was a routine trans-Pacific flight, carrying 307 people, 291 passengers, and 16 crew members, including both business and leisure travelers. As the Boeing 777-200ER approached San Francisco, something went terribly wrong. During landing, the plane's main landing gear and tail struck the seawall just before the runway. The impact ripped off the tail, causing the aircraft to spin out of control before crashing off the runway. A fire broke out, mainly on the right side of the plane. Tragically, 3 passengers lost their lives, and 187 others were injured, 49 of them seriously. The National Transportation Safety Board investigated the crash and found that the pilots mismanaged the landing. The plane was flying too low and too slow, partly because the autothrottle system wasn't properly engaged. By the time the crew realized the danger, it was too late to fix it. Investigators also pointed out the problems with Asiana Airlines' pilot training. The pilots weren't fully trained to handle automated flight systems, which may have confused them during landing. The NTSB stressed the importance of better training, so pilots can fully understand and control the aircraft's automation, especially during critical moments like landing. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302. On March 10, 2019, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 took off from Addis Ababa Bole International Airport, heading to Jomo Kenyatta International Airport in Nairobi, Kenya. The flight was operated using a Boeing 737 MAX 8 and carried 157 people, 149 passengers, and 8 crew members. Among them were business travelers, tourists, and United Nations personnel. Just 6 minutes after takeoff, the plane began to fly erratically, with sudden altitude changes and unusually high speed. Then, the aircraft's nose pitched downward. Despite the pilots' desperate attempts to pull up, the plane crashed near Bishoftu, about 40 miles southeast of Addis Ababa. Sadly, no one survived. Investigators from Ethiopia, the US, and France analyzed the flight data and cockpit voice recordings. The findings pointed to a failure in the angle of attack sensor, which fed wrong data to an automated system called MCAS, designed to prevent stalls. Instead, MCAS repeatedly forced the nose down, overriding the pilots' commands. This was eerily similar to the Lion Air Flight 610 crash just 5 months earlier. In December 2022, Ethiopian authorities confirmed that MCAS was the direct cause of the crash, noting that the pilots followed all Boeing's recommended procedures but still couldn't regain control. The U.S. National Transportation Safety Board agreed, but added that the faulty AOA sensors may have been damaged by a bird strike, something the final report did not mention. UPS Airlines Flight 1354. On August 14, 2013, UPS Airlines Flight 1354 was on a routine overnight cargo flight from Louisville, Kentucky to Birmingham, Alabama. The aircraft, an Airbus A300-600F, was part of UPS Logistics Network, carrying freight across the country. The flight crew included 58-year-old Captain Chieta Beale Jr. and 37-year-old First Officer Shonda Fanning. While approaching runway 18 in Birmingham, the aircraft descended too low, missing its intended glide path. The pilots, using a non-precision approach without vertical guidance, failed to notice their dangerously low altitude. Moments later, the plane clipped trees and crashed into a hilly terrain. About a mile from the runway, the aircraft exploded upon impact, killing both crew members. Thankfully, as a cargo flight, there were no passengers on board. The NTSB investigation found that pilot fatigue played a key role in the crash. The crew had not rested properly before their shift, likely due to circadian rhythm disruption. Investigators also noted that the pilots didn't monitor their altitude correctly, leading to a loss of situational awareness. Adding to the challenge, runway 18 lacked a precision approach system, making it even harder to land safely in the pre-dawn darkness. Saratov Airlines Flight 703. On February 11, 2018, Saratov Airlines Flight 703 took off from Moscow's Domodedovo Airport, heading to Orsk, a city near the Kazakhstan border. The plane, an Antonov An-148-100B, had 65 passengers and 6 crew members on board. But just 6 minutes into the flight, something went terribly wrong. The plane had climbed to 19,400 feet at 230 miles per hour, but then it suddenly started losing altitude fast. Witnesses saw it engulfed in flames as it crashed near the villages of Argonovo and Stepanovskoye. Sadly, everyone on board was killed. Investigators quickly got to work. The Interstate Aviation Committee recovered the black boxes the next day. What they found was alarming. The pilot's tube heaters, which stopped airspeed sensors from freezing, had never been turned on. Because of this, the sensors froze up, feeding the pilots conflicting speed readings. One indicator showed the plane speeding up, another showed it slowing down, and a third showed nothing at all. With no clear idea of how fast they were going, the pilots lost control, and the plane went down. The final report, released on June 27, 2019, confirmed the cause. The crew's incorrect reaction to faulty airspeed readings led to the crash, but that wasn't the only issue. Saratov Airlines also had major safety failures, including poor risk management and weak crew training. After the crash, the airline grounded all AN-148 planes, but the problem didn't stop there. Further inspection found more violations, and on June 1, 2018, Saratov Airlines lost its operating license, shutting it down for good. American Eagle Flight 5342. On the night of January 29, 2025, American Eagle Flight 5342, operated by PSA Airlines, was flying from Wichita, Kansas to Washington, D.C. The plane, a Bombardier CRJ-700, had 60 passengers and 4 crew members on board. Many of them were coming back from the U.S. Figure Skating Championships in Wichita, including well-known skaters and coaches. As the plane was getting ready to land at Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport, it collided midair with a U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter. The helicopter, from the 12th Aviation Battalion, was on a night training mission after taking off from Davidson Army Airfield in Virginia. The crash happened about a mile and a half from the runway at an altitude of 300 feet. Witnesses said they saw an explosion and debris fell into the icy Potomac River. Emergency crews, including firefighters, the U.S. Coast Guard, and local rescue teams, rushed to the scene. But freezing temperatures and strong winds made it hard to search for survivors in the water. Sadly, all 67 people on both aircraft, 64 on the passenger plane and 3 in the helicopter, lost their lives. The National Transportation Safety Board launched an investigation with the FAA and the Department of Defense. They recovered the flight recorders from Flight 5342 to find out what went wrong. Early reports showed that air traffic control had told the helicopter to keep clear of the plane, but what exactly led to the crash is still under investigation. Jeju Air Flight 2216. Jeju Air Flight 2216 was a regular flight from Bangkok, Thailand to Muan, South Korea, mostly carrying South Korean tourists returning home from holiday trips. On December 29, 2024, the Boeing 737-800 had 175 passengers and 6 crew members on board. As the plane got close to Muan International Airport, air traffic control warned the pilots about birds in the area. Soon after, the pilots reported that birds had hit the plane and declared an emergency. They tried to go around for another landing attempt, but the landing gear wouldn't come down. The plane had to land without its wheels, sliding on its belly. It touched down too far from the runway and couldn't slow down in time. It went off the end of the runway, crashed into a concrete structure, and exploded. Sadly, all 179 people, including all passengers and 4 crew members, lost their lives. Only 2 flight attendants at the back of the plane survived when that part broke off from the rest of the aircraft. Investigators from South Korea, along with U.S. experts and Boeing, looked into what happened. The flight recorders stopped working about 4 minutes before the crash, likely because the plane lost all power. They found bird remains in both engines, belonging to a type of migratory duck called the Baikal teal. This confirmed that a bird strike had caused both engines to fail, leading to the crash. Experts also pointed out that the concrete structure the plane hit should have been designed to brake on impact, which might have reduced the severity of the crash. Investigators also raised concerns about bird strikes at Muan International Airport, which has the highest rate of such incidents among South Korea's regional airports. Azerbaijan Airlines Flight 8243. Azerbaijan Airlines Flight 8243 was a passenger flight from Baku, Azerbaijan to Grozny, Russia. On December 25, 2024, the Embraer 190AR took off with 62 passengers and 5 crew members, mostly people traveling for business or holiday visits. About a few minutes into the flight, as the plane entered Russian airspace near Grozny, the pilots noticed their GPS signals were being blocked, likely due to jamming. The weather was foggy, making it hard to see, and after 2 failed attempts to land, they tried a 3rd time. That's when passengers and crew heard an explosion, and the plane was badly damaged. The pilots, thinking they had hit a bird, declared an emergency landing and tried to land at Makhachkala Airport in Dagestan. But bad weather made it impossible, so they changed course to Aktau Airport in Kazakhstan. On the way, the plane lost all hydraulic systems, making it very difficult to control. The pilots had to steer using the engines alone, and 4 hours later, the plane crashed while trying to land near Aktau Airport, exploding on impact. Sadly, 38 people, including both pilots and a flight attendant, lost their lives, while 29 passengers and 2 crew cabin members survived with injuries. Investigators from Azerbaijan, along with the international experts, found strong evidence that the plane was hit by an external attack. The wreckage had holes that didn't match a bird strike, but looked like shrapnel damage from a missile. Experts later identified pieces of a Russian Panzer S-1 air defense missile in the debris. Survivors also confirmed they heard an explosion before the crash. After these findings, Russian President Vladimir Putin expressed his condolences to Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev, calling it a tragic incident, but without admitting direct responsibility. Yeti Airlines Flight 691. Yeti Airlines Flight 691 was a domestic flight in Nepal, traveling from Kathmandu to newly opened Pokhara International Airport. On January 15, 2023, the ATR 72-500 aircraft took off with 68 passengers and 4 crew members. Among the passengers were 53 Nepalis and 15 foreigners from India, Russia, South Korea, Argentina, Australia, France, and Ireland. As the plane approached Pokhara, it was originally cleared to land on one runway, but the captain requested to use a different one. While making the final approach, videos captured the aircraft suddenly tilting sharply to the left before crashing into a river gorge, just 700 feet from the airport. Sadly, all 72 people on board lost their lives, making it Nepal's deadliest air crash since 1992 and the worst accident involving an ATR-72 aircraft. Nepal's Aircraft Accident Investigation Commission, with help from international experts, launched a detailed investigation. They recovered and analyzed the flight recorders and found that during landing, the pilots flying asked for the flaps to be extended to slow the plane down. However, instead of adjusting the correct lever, the other pilot accidentally moved the engine controls, causing both propellers to lose power. This mistake left the plane without thrust, leading to an aerodynamic stall that couldn't be recovered in time. The final report, released on December 28, 2023, pointed to several issues, including high workload, lack of proper training, poor teamwork between pilots, and failure to follow standard procedures. Investigators also found that the approach path the pilots used wasn't approved by the airline or aviation authorities. Experts have since stressed the need for better pilot training, stricter safety regulations, and improved oversight to help prevent such tragedies in the future. China Eastern Airlines Flight 5735. China Eastern Airlines Flight 5735 was a domestic flight in China, traveling from Kunming to Guangzhou. On March 21, 2022, the Boeing 737-800 took off at 1:15 p.m. with 123 passengers and 9 crew members on board. The flight was scheduled to land in Guangzhou later that afternoon. About an hour into the journey, while flying at 29,100 feet, the plane suddenly went into a steep dive near Wuzhou in the Guangxi region. Flight data showed the aircraft dropping at an extremely fast rate, over 31,000 feet per minute. It briefly leveled off but then continued its descent, crashing into a mountainous area. The crash caused a huge fire in the forest, and sadly, all 132 people on board lost their lives. It became one of the deadliest air disasters in China's recent history. China's aviation authorities launched an investigation with help from experts, including the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board and Boeing. Both the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder were recovered, though they were badly damaged. A preliminary report released on April 20, 2022, confirmed that the plane was well maintained, the crew was properly trained, and there were no dangerous materials on board. Weather conditions were also normal at the time of the crash. In May 2022, reports from U.S. officials suggested that someone in the cockpit may have intentionally caused the crash based on flight data. However, Chinese authorities have not confirmed this, stating that the investigation is still ongoing with no final conclusions yet. Pegasus Airlines Flight 2193. Pegasus Airlines Flight 2193 was a domestic flight in Turkey, traveling from Izmir to Istanbul on February 5, 2020. The Boeing 737-86J took off with 177 passengers and 6 crew members. And everything seemed normal until it was time to land in Istanbul. The plane attempted to land at Sabiha Gökçen Airport in bad weather. Heavy rain and strong tailwinds made conditions challenging, but the pilots proceeded with the landing. But after touching down, the plane didn't slow down as expected. It skidded off the end of the runway and tumbled down a 328-foot embankment. The impact broke the fuselage into 3 pieces and a fire started. But emergency teams quickly put it out. 3 passengers lost their lives, and 179 others were injured. An investigation later found that 2 other planes had tried to land at the same airport just before Flight 2193, but had to abort due to the bad weather. Reports also showed that the pilots didn't apply manual braking for 6 seconds after landing. Because of the strong tailwind, the plane kept moving too fast, and by the time they applied the brakes, it was too late to stop the overrun. Ukraine International Airlines Flight 752. On January 8, 2020, Ukraine International Airlines Flight 752 took off from Tehran, Iran, heading to Kiev, Ukraine. The Boeing 737-800 carried 176 people, 167 passengers, and 9 crew members from several countries, including Canada, Ukraine, Sweden, Afghanistan, and the UK. Just 2 minutes after takeoff, the plane was hit by 2 missiles fired by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. the first missile struck near the cockpit, cutting off communication and tracking signals. The crew had no time to react, and the plane crashed into a field near the village of Kalal Jabad. Sadly, everyone on board lost their lives. The attack happened during a time of high tension between the US and Iran, following a US strike that killed an Iranian general. At first, Iran denied responsibility, saying the crash was due to technical problems. But after evidence from intelligence sources and video footage surfaced, Iran admitted 3 days later that its military had mistakenly shot down the plane, thinking it was a threat. Iran's investigation blamed human error, pointing to a radar system mistake and miscommunication in the IRGC's air defense unit. The plane had been flying normally and didn't go off course. The incident sparked global outrage. In April 2023, an Iranian military court sentenced 10 people involved in the attack to prison, with the commander of the air defense unit receiving the longest sentence. However, families of the victims criticized the trial, saying it lacked transparency and real justice. Gold Coast Mid-Air Collision. On January 2, 2023, two sightseeing helicopters from SeaWorld Helicopters crashed into each other near the SeaWorld theme park in Gold Coast, Australia. These helicopters were flying short tours, giving passengers scenic views of the area. The crash happened when one helicopter was taking off while the other was landing. The one taking off had only been in the air for about 23 seconds when its rotor blades hit the front of the other helicopter. This caused the airborne helicopter to break apart and crash onto a sandbar, killing all 4 people on board, including the pilot. The landing helicopter, though heavily damaged, managed to land safely on the sandbar. All 6 people inside survived, but 3 had serious injuries while others had minor ones. The Australian Transport Safety Bureau started an investigation to find out what went wrong. Early reports showed that the main rotor blades of the departing helicopter struck the front of the arriving one. Investigators are looking into whether the pilots could see each other, how well they were communicating, and if the flights were following proper procedures. They also found traces of cocaine in the system of the pilot who died, but experts say this alone doesn't prove he was impaired at the time of the crash. Northwestern Air Flight 738. Northwestern Air Flight 738 was a chartered flight using a British Aerospace Jetstream 32 aircraft registered as CFNAA. On January 23, 2024, the flight was carrying workers from Fort Smith Airport in the Northwest Territories to the Diavik Diamond Mine, about 186 miles northeast of Yellowknife, Canada. The flight was arranged by the Rio Tinto Group to transport mine workers to the remote site. Just after takeoff from runway 30 at Fort Smith Airport, the plane reached about 140 feet in altitude and a speed of 160 knots. However, it suddenly lost control, hit trees about 3,078 feet from the end of the runway, and crashed 4,150 feet away. The crash was followed by a massive fire that destroyed around 80% of the wreckage. Sadly, 6 of the 7 people on board, including 2 crew members and 4 passengers, lost their lives. The only survivor was thrown from the aircraft during the crash. They had minor injuries and were taken to Fort Smith Health Center before being airlifted to Stanton Territorial Hospital in Yellowknife for further treatment. The Transportation Safety Board of Canada started an investigation, sending a team led by investigator Jeremy Workington to the crash site. Both the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder were recovered and analyzed. In April 2024, the TSB released a preliminary report confirming that the plane couldn't gain enough altitude after takeoff, leading to the crash. Investigators are looking at various factors, such as the aircraft's performance, weight and balance, weather conditions, and possible mechanical issues. The investigation is still ongoing, with the TSB working to find the cause of the crash and recommend safety improvements to prevent similar accidents in the future.